Georgia Gang on this Sunday, July 12. New polls in Georgia's Senate and governor's races. A setback for the DOJ in the Fulton County elections investigation. And metro area residents make their voices heard in the debate over data centers. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Brian are all here. I'm Deeper Dukes in for Lori Geary. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Recent polls are sending mixed signals about where Georgia voters stand as the general election season heats up. Separate tracking from Fox News and WIC Research agree that incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff holds the edge against Republican Congressman Mike Collins. However, when it comes to the race for governor, the exact same polling delivers conflicting outcomes. Now, in the race for governor, a recent Fox News poll shows Keisha Lance Bottoms ahead with 52% support to Republican Rick Jackson's 47%. However, a WIC Research poll conducted during that exact same time period shows a much tighter race, placing Jackson slightly ahead, with 14% of voters still undecided. So, Theron, let's start with the numbers in the Senate race. Certainly good news for Democrats.
It is, and let the poll numbers and all the speculations begin. I mean, we were just here last week talking about a Fox News poll, and while I did say it was great momentum for Jon Ossoff and Keisha Lance Bottoms, but there would be more polls come out and it would tighten. And what you see at this poll is particularly with Jon Ossoff, he holds a lead over Mike Collins, and I think that also you see more undecideds in this poll, because I think the Fox News polls clearly people said, all right, I'm with Jon Ossoff or Mike Collins or Rick Jackson or Keisha Lance Bottoms. But I do believe that undecided number is real. Right now, you got about 10 to 12% of people right now that I think are open to all of these candidates who are running up and down the ballot. But if you're Jon Ossoff, getting these poll numbers consistently, you're feeling really good. And I think if you're Keisha Lance Bottoms, you're holding the lead. It's now tightened a little bit. More undecideds in that race. The money from Rick Jackson hasn't hit the streets yet. It's going to definitely hit the airwaves. So when they start to attack her, you'll see those numbers continue to tighten.
Yeah, focusing on Collins just for a second. Collins finishing second in two polls back to back. Cause for concern?
No, we're very early on. And look, that second one showed it much closer than the first one, but I think there's some different methodologies there. It looked like in the first one, the pollster forced respondents to say either Ossoff or Collins. And in the second, there was an undecided option, and we saw a huge undecided in that race. So when you kind of read between the lines there, you can kind of see that there still are some votes up for grabs. And right now, those folks are saying, when forced, I'm voting for Jon Ossoff because that's the name that they know. Mike Collins is not yet a household name in Georgia outside of his own district in Northeast Georgia. So give him some time, and it's going to take a lot of money. He's going to have to do a much better job fundraising to get his name out there and to drive his message than he did in the primary. But Republicans need to take a breather and not freak out about being behind in these polls. The governor and Senate nominees for the Republicans just went through bruising, divisive primaries. So we're still in that month-long period where the party's base is healing and coming back together. So when we start getting into August and September, that's when you're going to see this tightening occur, and you're going to kind of revert to partisan norms in Georgia. So don't worry, Republicans. Things are going to level out a little bit here.
Yeah, and the Collins campaign making news with the announcement of yet another high-profile staff shakeup, bringing in a new chief of staff to lead his operation. Now, it marks his third top aide in a year. And when you look at the polling numbers, Melita, do you think that the constant staff shakeups are impacting some of those numbers?
Well, certainly the reasons behind those staff shakeups are impacting the numbers. Collins has a bad habit of surrounding himself with people who have bad records. The first the first chief of staff who left was because he had a history of alleged violent behavior, including threatening other people and kicking a dog. And then this second campaign chief of staff who was leaving the campaign was because he was trying to get a Holocaust denier released from prison, and because he also had associations with white Christian nationalists. So if he continues to surround himself with people who bring bad headlines to his campaign, then his numbers will not improve. There's also an allegation this week that Collins used federal money to produce campaign-style videos through his congressional office, produced by the same firm which produced his campaign commercials.
So Phil, obviously Collins has that strong support with his base, but when you're looking to bring others in, how do you think some of what Melita brought up would impact his chances here?
Well, I think with these chief of staff things, I think that second chief of staff stuff was all exaggerated in the media, and it's nothing wrong with campaigns. Parties do it, campaigns do it. They shuffle their staff. Collins is gearing up, as Brian was saying, for the fall campaign. These polls, just to go back to what you were discussing earlier, are early, and it's a long way till election time. And I think last week I criticized the Fox poll, among other things. They didn't even poll likely voters. That's a no-no in the polling, and the Fox has been very inaccurate. Matt Towery's been tracking some of this, and that Wick poll was far more accurate. And yes, the center is up for grabs. That's what happens in campaigns. The bases are coming out. There is undecideds, but I think that Collins is in very good shape. You're going to see he will need money. That's a good point. But Trump says he'll be coming in for Collins. I think there'll be a Republican unity rally. I think a lot of things will happen in both parties after Labor Day. And so I think basically the Republicans are in pretty good shape. Yes, Collins has to step it up with name recognition. But I mean, Trump himself, his PAC has over $400 million, and Georgia will be targeted to get rid of Jon Ossoff.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about the Senate race. Another senator, Senator Warnock, is a big news right now because there's growing speculation that he may be laying the groundwork for a 2028 presidential run. So while he's given no public indication that he intends to run, political insiders do point to Warnock's expanding national profile, recent high-profile visits to key battleground states as clear signs he could be testing the waters, so to speak, for the highest office in the land. So Theron, what are you hearing from the Warnock camp?
I think Raphael Warnock would be a wonderful presidential candidate, but only if he wants it. Deidre, I had a chance to actually see the senator on July 4th. He actually ran to Peachtree. When we talked, he talked about raising his kids. He talked about travel. He talked about raising money. He's got a new book out. He's on a sort of a sabbatical from Ebenezer Baptist Church. But what did not come up was, hey, I'm going to be a presidential candidate. Now, he wouldn't tell me this early because, obviously I sit here and you don't want me to, actually go out here and say that he said it. But if you look at what he's doing, I think that people can say, hey, he's traveling around the country. He's going to key battleground states like Mississippi where we have U.S. Senate candidates. He is doing a book tour. And if you think about his appeal nationally, being on national networks, being very, very specific about going after Donald Trump, he is definitely acting like he is ambitious. But I think that, he won't be able to make this decision until after Jon Ossoff is done in Keisha Lance Bottoms in this election. But definitely his name is going to continue to be on the mix, not because he said that he will run or he wants to run, but because he's just a national Democratic figure that many candidates across the country right now want him to come to their state to help them campaign.
And of course, Melita, both Ossoff and Warnock have been, there's been some speculation about a possible VP run in 828.
Well, Ossoff's new book is a really good one. I'm about a third of the way through it. I saw him at a book talk. I saw him during a fundraiser for Keisha Lance Bottoms earlier in the week. It's natural for Ossoff and Warnock to be mentioned as presidential or vice presidential contenders because they're among the youngest of the U.S. Senate. They're fresh faces, and they both bring special talents to their oratory. And Warnock has particularly a calming influence and a counterbalance to the fear and dissent that's sowed by Republicans. He brings a calming moral authority to his oratory, and that is a nice contrast to the corruption of the Trump administration.
Now, you had an interesting take on this during our Red Clay Rundown streaming program.
Yeah, well, I think Raphael Warnock, when it comes to political talent and the performative aspect of politics, is as good as I've ever seen in Georgia. When you watch him in his commercials, he's fantastic. I mean, he's likable and he's a great actor. And I don't mean that to diminish his skills. I think it's important in a presidential race. It is a video medium race, right? You don't do it with shoe leather, getting around knocking on doors. You've got to be really good on TV. I think where he needs to improve, he's going to go to a national stage, is where But he has not been as good in the campaigns, has been on the debate stage. Maybe just as a pastor, that conflict that is built into a debate is uncomfortable for him. And there's a lot of debates in a Democratic primary. He's going to really need to improve on those aspects. But as a Georgia Republican who, I don't really care too much about the U.S. Senate, because what does Congress do anyway, right? I mean, what do they even pass? Who cares? I care about Georgia politics, and I would love to have an open U.S. Senate seat in 2028 if he decides to run for president instead of running for U.S. Senate.
Real quick, we'll let you have the last word.
Okay, I think that the Warnock thing is just a little thing to get clicks on social media, and it's basically Ossoff is the one to watch. I'm watching his spending strategy. He is blowing over $10 million in various states, New Hampshire, Nevada, North Carolina. Why is he doing that? He's the guy that the left really wants, and he's positioning himself with all these left-wing influencers, some of them anti-Semites, which is apparently that's a litmus test now for people who want to run for president. You got to be against Israel. So watch Ossoff. I think Warnock is way too radical. Some of those sermons are pretty chilling. He goes more with the Gospel of St. Trendy rather than the Holy Bible. A lot of people have criticized him for that.
I love what you said, Melita. Calming moral authority. You know, he just brings that to the table. It just makes Phil so upset to hear that calm.
Oh, look at some of his radical sermons. We can rebut that.
At least his are biblically based. He quotes the scripture.
Really?
And we'll leave it there. Up next, 2 major court rulings involving state prosecutors in the 2020 election. We discuss next.
The Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
A major setback for the Department of Justice in its ongoing investigation into the 2020 election. A federal judge has blocked a sweeping DOJ demand for the names, home addresses, and personal contact information of thousands of Fulton County election workers and volunteers. Now, this as the feds ramp up their investigation of the 2020 election in Fulton County. The FBI has reportedly assigned some 260 analysts to review records seized during a raid at the Fulton elections hub last year. So the judge calling the DOJ subpoena an unreasonable and staggering request, Phil.
Well, I think that one of the issues was the statute of limitations that had run out, and that seems to be true. However, as you point out, Deidre, there's a big investigation going on with all these FBI agents. I think July 17th is kind of their self-imposed rule to kind of bring up new evidence. Now, new evidence is certainly different, and the U.S. Attorney has said that if there's some evidence, we're going to pursue it. And so I think that yes, it's a temporary setback, but I think this is far from over.
Yeah, absolutely, Melita. With that ramped up FBI investigation.
Well, first off, let me say that it was Reverend Warnock's book, not Senator Ossoff's. But the other thing about this judge order to quash the subpoena is the fact that releasing the personal information about poll workers would have had a chilling effect for recruiting future poll workers. It would have made poll workers subject to all kinds of swatting and just tactics that would be inappropriate. So I'm really happy to see the judge protecting the personal information of the people who are diligent about working for our polls in early voting and voting day.
Yeah, and we're also seeing a major legal challenge to Georgia's controversial prosecutor oversight panel. It's been thrown out. A Fulton County judge has officially dismissed a bipartisan lawsuit brought by local DAs who argue that the Republican-backed commission unconstitutionally interfered with their duties. So the judge ruled the prosecutors failed to show they have been harmed by the oversight board. And this is a significant win, Brian, for state leaders who created the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the Republican legislators who passed this, they come from jurisdictions where there were DAs who weren't doing their jobs. One was from Athens, Houston Gaines, who soon will be in Congress. Deborah Gonzalez is a DA, and on her first day in office, she was like, here are all the crimes that I'm not going to prosecute. Hello, criminals, are you listening? You can do this, without any consequences. And then another was from Fulton County here in Metro Atlanta, where there was a Republican DA who had gotten into some legal problems, and they wanted a mechanism to be able to remove them from office. So it was bipartisan from the very beginning. Democrats have lied about this at every step. They said it was all about Fani Willis, all about Fani Willis. Have they used it against Fani Willis? No, they haven't, just as they said. This is about making sure that people who feel unsafe in their communities because prosecutors aren't doing their jobs have recourse. They can issue a complaint, and there's a state panel to look at it. We have a board that looks at judges. How is this different? We have a board that looks at our sheriffs. How is this different, right? This is pretty standard. This is very normal. Democrats have tried to partisanize something that should just be accepted as good policy.
Yeah, and Theron, this was a bipartisan effort on the part of the DAs who brought the suit.
It was, and I think that while Brian does a really good job of defending the Republicans who wanted this done, but it was done during a time where Fani Willis was a key target of the Republican legislature because of the actions that she took against the 19 defendants, and particularly her pursuit of Donald Trump and his interference in the 2020 election. Now, had they used it directly to go after her in a manner where actually bring her into the actual chambers of the state chambers to talk about it? No, but it definitely has some similarities in the rhetoric and the talk that we had come from some of the legislators that were supporting this. But Deidre, I always say this: I think that the people should always decide who their district attorneys are going to be. We've seen these district attorneys actually get beat. Some of them have actually held office, but a lot of these folks who are doing bad things, the voters have ousted them, right? They have gotten rid of them. So when you start putting oversight, which I'm not against oversight, I'm against oversight when it really truly does not have a metrics, and it oversees the constitutional responsibility of the voters. And we have an attorney general, which his job is to make sure that he keep district attorneys across the state of Georgia in line. If they're doing bad things, that's what the attorney general's office is for. And then lastly, I remind folks, and B-Rob heard me give this example, when we saw that the district attorney down in Glenn County, Brunswick, Georgia, around the Ahmaud Arbery case was happening, she clearly was interfering with the investigation. The district attorney general stepped in and removed her. Then you got the other DA after that, and then the other DA after that. So there is a process in place, but clearly this lawsuit, it did not show enough evidence, but that doesn't mean that it's over. It can be an appeal, and we'll just see what happens.
Well, let me just, the people do not have any investigative authority. If there's corruption, and there has been, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council can have investigators. Brian makes a great point. We have oversight over other segments of public officials, but the voters, yes, have a role, but we don't know what corruption is going on. We don't know if things aren't being prosecuted. That was the main reason. And as Brian pointed out, the one blatant example was a left-wing district attorney saying, I'm not prosecuting these crimes. There has to be oversight.
But the JQC is there. And what this did, it actually put more oversight on the JQC. And they did not like the outcomes of what has been in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, for decades.
You're just trying to protect your left-wing DAs that are under the microscope.
I am not trying to protect anybody. If that DA does wrong, he or she should definitely be investigated.
Good. You should be in favor of this.
Yeah, but I'm saying, let's go back to the true intent of the oversight. You already had the Judicial Qualification Commission in place. They just didn't like the outcomes from the JQC.
You know, the fact of the matter is here, the board that does the oversight has been very modest in its approach. They have not gone after prosecutors willy-nilly. They have not been partisan in how they handle it. And that is good. I don't want them to be overzealous. What I want is the threat of it to be there to keep DAs in line, to make sure that they do their job, to let them know there are consequences if they don't. And from this point, it seems like that's working.
Well, we'll leave it there. Melita?
Well, there was one line in the order which said the discipline they fear remains entirely hypothetical. So the minute the panel oversteps, there's room for another lawsuit, and it will no longer be hypothetical.
All right, well, coming up, 2 metro area communities put the brakes on data centers amid ongoing expansion statewide. Our panelists weigh in.
Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
2 metro Atlanta communities are pushing back against the tech boom, successfully blocking and freezing future data center expansions. The Marietta City Council has passed a temporary moratorium halting all new data centers through the end of the year to reevaluate zoning rules. And Douglas County commissioners voted to completely deny a developer's rezoning request for a massive data center complex. Now, that vote marks a major victory for a group of local residents who fought the project over infrastructure strains and quality of life concerns. So So, Brian, several state lawmakers introduced legislation to pause data center expansion to give them time to study this issue, and not one passed.
You know, we have every need and every desire to make sure that this is done safely and appropriately. I think there's a lot of misinformation about these data centers. One, they're huge property taxpayers, and that is a great way to relieve the property tax burden on taxpayers. And in some ways, it could even help stop the rise of sales taxes, which are often used to replace property taxes. So we need a really dedicated messaging campaign, an education campaign for Georgians, paid for probably by these groups that are doing the data centers, to address some of this misinformation, like that they create a lot of noise in the community. That's not true. The idea that they mess with and pollute the local water, that's a construction issue, not a data center issue. It can be just as true of a new housing complex. We need to have standards for that. That's fine. But if you're out there and you are no data centers ever, Georgia's going to fall behind. They're going to go elsewhere, and we're going to lose to China. And I tell you this, a lot of this messaging, because it's consistent, you can go anywhere in the state, they're saying the exact same thing. They are getting it from a Chinese paid-for misinformation campaign on American social media, and it is working. I mean, what they are saying to Americans is getting through, and we're hearing it in these county commission and city council chambers. And this is a really dangerous time. I'm all for taking a break to study the issue and get it right, but we've got to be serious about it, and we got to fight misinformation.
Is a pause needed?
Well, I think, look, we need data centers, right? And I'm pro data center, but I'm also pro giving an opportunity for residents to make sure that the location of these data centers and the impact it could possibly have, it needs to be debated. And so it's not necessarily about, I think we kind of all agree that data centers are here and they're going to continue to go across Georgia. But when you go with any development and you talk about placement, you talk about zoning, you talk about power, you talk about water usage, that's a robust conversation that a developer has to have. And essentially, this is what it is. But I do believe, I agree with B-Rob, I think there is a lot of misinformation out there about data centers, but I think that the residents deserve an opportunity to make sure that these data centers, which a lot of them are willing to pay extra. They understand there's going to be some large load clientele sort of buildings they're going to bring in, they'll pay that extra, but also we've got to give the residents an opportunity to ask questions and make sure that the process that they're following with that county or city is the proper process.
Flock cameras also making big headlines right now here in the metro area. They have become a valuable tool for law enforcement to track down criminals, find missing cars. But Flock license plate cameras are now facing scrutiny after a string of recent reports and officer arrests over the misuse of the database has sparked a fierce debate over privacy and oversight. So, Melita, really those reports are troubling.
They're very troubling because in many cases these arrests happened after bad apples in the law enforcement community used Flock cameras to track and trace ex-wives and ex-girlfriends they were trying to intimidate. So I applaud the law enforcement community for cracking down on the misuse of what is a good tool, but they need to be very aware of those within their ranks who would use this technology to intimidate women.
Yeah, and really, Phil, Flock cameras are great law enforcement tools, but there has to be some type of, I guess, happy medium as far as making sure that they're not being abused.
Well, absolutely, and you made a good point there, and Theron, this is where you need oversight. Don't be opposed on that one. Yeah, there has to be protocols in place for like the sheriff's department, where one of those, I think it was 4 deputies that were doing this. So I don't know if the state legislature needs to step in, but certainly law enforcement has to start policing its own on this, and there are valid privacy concerns.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for that segment. Up next, winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Malia, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I want to express condolences to the family of Lucy Hargret Draper. She was an early supporter of Georgia Windless, but she was an ardent feminist, and she not only acted on her beliefs, she made sure that those who were fighting the fight were documented, and the libraries at both the University of Georgia and Georgia State have projects which have commemorated the Women's Project and the women's advocacy movement, and so her legacy will be those memories.
Phil?
Well, I'm going to make Candace Gross a winner. She's the commissioner of the State Health Services, which is over the Department of Family and Health Services. She has pushed back against Senator John Ossoff for his one-sided biased report, so-called, on foster care. There's been a lot of reforms. She would be the first person to say there's problems and we can do better. But Ossoff had this report written by his Democrat staff that trashed it. There are a lot of good things that are happening in our foster care system, and the commissioner is pointing that out and pushing back on Ossoff.
Baron?
All right, my first two winners are going to be Cecilia Houston Torrance and Sue Ross. They went to the FIFA World Cup match, Argentina, Egypt. We know that was an amazing match, but Cece in particular got into a little back and forth with this icon, this guy in streaming service. He's called Speed, and his handle is I Show Speed. But I want to commend them because they came on the Theron State podcast, and we talked about this went viral. And basically what she was saying, Deidre, is that we're praying for you. Like, don't ever give up. And he was going for Egypt, but ultimately Argentina won. So thank you, Sue Ross and Cece, for coming on. And then also I want to extend my sincere condolences to the family of Larry Pellegrini, a pillar in the Georgia's LGBTQ plus advocacy community, and Georgia Equality's very first political director, who recently passed away, unfortunately, this week. He was always at the Capitol, amazing lobbyist. He was down there, and we're going to miss him.
And Brian?
Well, my losers this week are Park Atlanta for not paying their employees on time and creating some issues there. The United States Postal Service, we saw news this week that the big facility down in Palmetto is a dangerous place for workers because there's no cell phone service, and it takes 25 minutes for healthcare workers to get there in an emergency. And I'd like to say thank you to Tom Jennings at the Johnston & Murphy in Lenox Mall. I walked in to get exchange a belt. I walked in immediately. He's like, "Watch you every Sunday," and then got me some really quick service. And Mercedes-Benz North America, of course, huge employer here in Sandy Springs, but they just built a technology center with a $39 million investment, 160 high-paying jobs, and they're bringing 500 more jobs to the headquarters. So they're a winner.
They certainly are. Ended on a great note. Have a great week.